ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, men of honor finalists, good evening. It is my great privilege to join you this evening in a celebration of good men who do good things for good reasons, men of honor. I watched their videos tonight, and mi just sinon stop na mi just talk trupla line. Mipla like senis in PNG. Now mipla looking road finish. Every one of these amazing men is out there in their village, in their community, faithfully doing their part to make their society a better world for their children and their wives. We're not only here tonight to have a good time, and I do hope you are having a good time. We're here tonight to lift our eyes toward our goal, our destination, a society in which all men are men of honor, all women are women of honor. My name is Anton Lutz. I'm a human rights defender. I'm a missionary. I grew up in Enga province. A few minutes ago, you heard about my work to help those who have been falsely accused, attacked, even tortured. Now, I've heard some people, superstitiously and randomly, believe that I am on the side of Team Sanguma. Others believe that there is a badass Sanguma spirit in Enga which somehow physically manifests as this Kila white man with dislocation straight and drives a Land Cruiser and speaks with an Engan accent. Well, people believe all kinds of things, don't they? But more on that later. I'd like to share part of my story with you this evening. My story is part of a great story. A story with many characters, many adventures, many sorrows. It's a story in which virtue and values are set against selfishness and corruption. It's a story about perseverance, patience, and the hope for peace. It's a story about how, in each generation, we get to take stock of all that has come before us and choose what we will take forward into the future. And so I'd like to begin now with a story about a young tree. Once upon a time, there was a young tree. His name was Liwai Diwai. He lived in the same garden as many other plants. Some were big, some were small, some lived honest lives, peaceable and kind. Some spent their time gambling or posting selfies on Facebook and acting, like lunatics. Near Liwai Diwai stood his father, a mighty tree. There they stood, side by side. One day, Liwai saw two old women walking in the garden. The sun was hot, and they were looking for a piece of shade. When they came near Liwai, he played a trick on them and moved his branches so there was no shade. His father saw what Liwai was doing and began to move his own branches so that a deep patch of shade appeared. The women were able to find rest from the sun. "Why did you help them, Daddy?" Liwai asked. "They are outsiders." "My boy," he replied, "I saw they were in need of rest. I am a tree of the Diwai clan. I had to help." As Liwai grew up, he noticed that Olkapul began to come and eat his fruit. This made him very cross. Why should they benefit from my hard work? He wanted to know. He shook his branches angrily, and the animals fled in terror. His father, however, just smiled and shifted his own leaves to show another fruit to a hungry bird. He then dropped a very plump fruit down to a little rat who was scurrying around looking for food. He opened his arms wider and wider to get as much sun as he could so that his fruits would be even bigger and better. "Son," the old tree said, "this fruit is not for us. It is for all the animals of the garden. I am a tree of the Diwai clan. I am generous." Liwai noticed a little bird crying and flying near his face. He tried to swat it away. "Get out of here, you stupid bird! Can't you see I'm busy?" The bewildered bird fell toward the ground. His father shook his head. "Come to me and find rest," his father said softly. "Here is safety. Here is your nest." "But, Dad, if you let one bird come and build a home in your branches, they'll all want to. You have to say no." "But I am a tree of the DY clan. I can be here for this little one." And so it went. The old tree let children play in his leaves. He let the gardener chop off 20 of his branches one year when they were short of firewood. One time, Lewi's father even tore off his own highest branch to let a pure beam of sunlight shine in on two little annoying berry bushes who were always arguing who got more attention from the sun. Lewi, however, didn't get it. Why did his father always say and explain his inexplicable actions by saying that he was a tree of the DY clan? What was so special about the DY clan anyway? Why wouldn't his father put more effort into his own beauty and height and wealth? Wasn't that the point of being a tree? One cloudy day, the owner of the garden came to the old tree and said, "Well, my friend, it's time." And old man DY smiled and simply replied, "I have lived as a tree of the DY clan. It has been a good life. Thank you." He leant closer to Lewi. "Lewi, my boy, I have a secret to tell you. The trees of the DY clan used to be selfish and irritating, just like those two berry bushes. But one of our ancestors long ago was there when God himself spoke from the heavens saying, 'This is my beloved son, listen to him.' And many of us did. For nearly 2,000 years, the trees of the DY clan have tried to be different. We have lived our lives for the good of others. We have tried to be generous and trustworthy and forgiving." The owner of the garden had now returned with his axe and began to chop. "My father taught me, and so I have taught you. Listen to the Son of God. Be generous, trustworthy, forgiving." Chop, chop, chop went the axe. "My boy, we live and we give for the good of others. That's what we do as trees of the DY clan." Chop. And as the great tree at last began to fall, Lewi heard his father's last words. "Go on, my son. Grow and give, and teach your children that this is how we live. I am a tree of the DY clan, and so are you." Lewi watched as his father's mighty trunk was cut into planks and taken away to become a school for all the children in the village. Even now, his father's life was being used for a good purpose. There were tears in Lewi's eyes, and he hardly noticed as the birds, who now needed a new home, circled around him. And when they asked him for a place to build their nests, he welcomed them gladly and did not chase them away as before. 1,000 suns came and went, and eventually even his father's stump rotted away to nothing. Lewi was now the tallest tree in the garden. Night after night, he would gaze up into the stars and galaxies of the night sky. Lewi knew his father was finally gone. The old tree's atoms and molecules were now part of the whole garden. But, he realized, his father's spirit of playfulness lived on in the children's laughter. His spirit of hospitality lived on in the nests and burrows of the animals. His spirit of generosity and sacrifice lived on as peace between the two fat little berry bushes. And Lewi, now standing tall and giving generously to those around him, now understood. He knew that the ancient and mighty spirit of love which had once transformed his DY clan ancestors now lived in his own heart, changing him from the inside out. He wasn't only Lewi anymore. He knew from his roots to his tips, he too was a tree of the DY clan. Lewi DY looked across to where his own sons and daughters were growing, and he looked forward to teaching them all he could. And Lewi was at peace. We are here tonight to showcase and celebrate and learn from these strong trees of the DY clan, these men of honor who we have seen profiled tonight. Men who themselves grew up in households led by men and women of honor, who are today raising their own children to become men and women of honor. Honor is the project of lifetimes. These men who we have seen tonight, these men of the DY clan, are showing Papua New Guinea what it can mean to be fearless and brave and generous and kind and true to themselves. They are teaching us what it means to be men of honor in a confusing world, so that we can stand up alongside them and be honorable with them, being the light that lets the next generation defy the darkness and grow strong and healthy. 50 years from now, may our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren look back and thank us for trying, for doing our best and then a little bit more, for caring, for waking up each day and choosing to be men and women of honor. Like Liwai Duai, my story begins long ago, many years before I was born. I am named after my great-grandfather, Anton Lutz. He was a Lutheran pastor sent to India in 1912 as a missionary, and he died more than 30 years before I was born. Near where he lived in South India was a Catholic church which had a low stone wall that ran down the middle of the sanctuary. Important and privileged Christians would worship on one side of the stone wall, while the poor and the outcasts had to remain on the other side. This division between high caste and low caste was part of the ancient Hindu culture, not a part of the new Christian culture. When a new Catholic priest arrived that year, he could not believe what he was seeing. This man could have been walking one-man decision and destroyed that stone wall with a sledgehammer. So the elite Christians, the Bigsot ones, they were so offended they walked out. They could not stand being part of a church that allowed the Pipialain to worship freely with Olfensitag. They marched down the street to the new Lutheran missionary. They marched down the street to the new Lutheran missionary, my great-grandfather, and told him, "Paterea and biged. Now mibla kamab Lutheran entasol." Anton replied that he must consult with his fellow missionaries. Now, the Lutheran missionaries actually agreed with the young Catholic priest that this business of separating the body of Christ with a stone wall down the middle of the church was completely unacceptable. They advised Anton to refuse to deal with such ignorance and prejudiced people. But my great-grandfather was a bold and fearless man, and he believed that as Christians we ought to bear with those who are blind to the truth. He knew that God will create faith and indeed social reform, with no need for us to become violent or destructive. Anton then began to meet with this group of proud, high-caste believers, teaching them from God's Word. Though my great-grandfather faced consequences for this stand, for trying to help these humbugs, in time, God was merciful, and this small congregation of high-caste believers saw the light, reversed their position, and they themselves threw open their doors, gladly welcoming Christians of every social group. God's Word, faithfully proclaimed with patience and generosity of heart, had overcome their prejudice and ignorance. And so I learned from my great-grandfather Anton to be generous and patient, even when faced with humbugs, because God will be faithful. Anton's son, my grandfather Arnold, he grew up in India during those years. As World War II swallowed up the world, my grandfather studied theology in the United States, and when the war ended, he returned to India as a missionary. Though my grandfather served in many roles, his passion was the education of the deaf, who at that time were often outcasts from society. As a young man, my grandfather had suffered an illness which made him temporarily deaf, Yaupas. And thereafter, deaf ministry and education always held a special place in his heart. He worked in South India with my grandmother for 42 years, founding 3 schools for the deaf, which function to this day. I learned from my grandfather, Arnold, how compassion and commitment to education will make a real difference for those people whom the rest of society would like to ignore. Arnold's son, my father, Steve, grew up in India, hearing these stories and watching his father work. When it was his turn, he too raised his hand and was sent as a missionary, a doctor, a surgeon, to Papua New Guinea. He brought his young family with him, and so it was that I and my brothers and sister came to grow up in Enga. My father is well known in Enga for his tenacity and persistence. He never gave up, and he never stopped trying. He was skilled in many areas, able to fix life-saving hospital equipment, X-ray machines, suction machines, a hydroelectric plant, able to reattach a hand that had been cut off, or sew up the holes in a human heart while it kept beating. Even today, I meet his former patients up and down the Highlands. Many of them are alive today because my dad refused to give up on them. My father also took medical teams. He also took medical teams deep into the most remote parts of PNG, hiking up to 2 weeks beyond the last airstrips, teaching about hygiene and nutrition, scouting new airstrip locations, vaccinating children, demonstrating integrity and honor every step of the way. As kids, we would often go with him on our school breaks. One of my dad's favorite sayings was, "Whatever your hand sees to do it with all your heart." That was how he lived his life. He looked for opportunities to serve others. He served with all his heart, to the best of his abilities, till the day he died just over 8 years ago. After completing university in the United States, I returned to Papua New Guinea in 2004, while my dad was still alive, and together we began helping the remote Penale people on the border of Enga and East Sepik Province build an airstrip and a health post. It was quite a project. We would come and go from the project site by wooden canoe, pool canoe type, a 2-day trip on the beautiful but dangerous Karwari River. We uprooted trees, helped mediate village conflict, moved mud, and fixed that tractor too many times to count. 5 years into this project, and nowhere near its completion, my dad was diagnosed with a brain tumor. But that was not enough to stop him. He put his chemotherapy drugs in a brown paper bag and brought them back here, so that even while he was taking the heavy medication, he could still help us with the work. I learned from my father, Dr. Steve, how serving others is not just a one-off thing or even a career. Serving others is how one lives life and lives it well. One of the greatest honors of my life was knowing and working alongside a brave Engan named Elijah. I first knew him as my Sunday school teacher, and then years later as a friend, a fellow educator about HIV, and then as a volunteer HIV and AIDS counselor who, without pay, went to visit his clients in their homes. In the last years of his life, I knew Elijah as a man of honor and courage who spoke out about the false beliefs and horrific violence that are taking hold in Enga and indeed throughout our country. And Elijah did more than speak out. In fact, he used to carry a small loudhailer with him so that more people could hear what he was saying. Elijah was also a man of action, but not of violence. Once, when a stranger was being attacked after a car accident, I ran into the fight, pushing the attackers away. But Elijah ran to the man on the ground. He knelt down at his side and helped him clear his airway so that he would not drown in his own blood. I was angry and desperate. Elijah was calm and compassionate. On September 16, 2017, Elijah stood up for a young woman who had been falsely accused of sanguma and tortured. Her name was Shirley. Though he did not know her, Elijah saw her for who she was, a daughter of God in her hour of need, and he defended her against an angry and frightened crowd who believed that she was guilty of something. When health workers were afraid to treat her extensive injuries, Elijah calmly demanded they do the right thing. When he saw that she needed to be moved to a hospital, he traveled through the night with her so that she would not be alone with strangers. And when the nurses at that referral hospital mistook Elijah for a one-talk and told him that Shirley needed a blood transfusion, Elijah did not correct their mistake. Instead, he smiled and gladly gave his own blood to help a tortured stranger. That's what a man of honor looks like. Steadfast and loving and selfless. My brother Elijah is dead. If he wasn't, I think he would be here tonight with us as a Man of Honor finalist. Of course, I could go on and on about my other grandparents, my other great-grandparents, my mentors, my teachers, my professors, colleagues, friends, not to mention my amazing mother, a guiding light for so many. Every one of these people has had an impact on me, and in one way or another, helped me become the man I am today. These are the mighty and honorable trees of my DY clan. I stand because they stood. The reason we are here tonight is to raise the bar, to set our sights higher, to see the trees of the DY clan, and we all have them in our own families and our own histories. To see these people and thank God for them, to call them men of honor and mean it. My parable of the garden is not yet complete. Before we look at sorcery, accusation, violence, and its effects in our nation, let us consider for a moment our place in the great garden, our place in the story of the universe. When you stop to think about it, like Lewi Dui, you and I are the descendants of the love of untold generations of men and women. Though you may know nothing else about your ancient ancestors, you do know that every one of them invested their time and love and dedication into raising a son or daughter, teaching them what was important, giving them the skills and attitudes they would need one day to raise their own sons and daughters. You are the descendants of the people who cared, the people who tried, the people who didn't give up. That's your heritage. And you are also an ancestor of the future, a custodian, a guardian, a warrior, whose choice it now is, whether or not you will stand up and put on your boots, your heels, your socks, your slippers, whatever it may be, and face what's coming. In a time of change, honor remains the same. Honor is always about how we treat one another, how we communicate with one another. It's about respect. Our choices, character, commitments. Honor is about interrelatedness. Our communities, our societies, our nations, our world. We've seen this proven time and again this evening as we've seen the profiles of these amazing Men of Honor finalists. Honor doesn't just matter in fairy tales and movies about heroes and princesses. Honor matters in stories about strong, professional, ethical men and women who work in a dangerous environment where the battle for your soul is on every day. Honor is important for smart Papua New Guineans who are concerned by some of the directions which have been taken by governments past and indeed present. Honor is necessary for loyal Papua New Guineans who long to see peace and prosperity and transparent good governance throughout our land. Are these fairy tales? No. We know these stories. We live these stories. These narratives get us out of bed in the morning and keep us going throughout the day. It is not just that we need the money, or that we have a house full of kids, or maybe one talks to feed. We believe in something more. We hope for something better. We ache for a better future than the one we're seeing coming. And in the narrative of this young democracy, honor is important. So important that we call our judges, Your Honor. We call our elected leaders, Honorable so's and Honorable this and that. Sorry for anyone who actually has one of those titles tonight. Now, because these are titles, not always descriptions of their character, and yet these titles link us to an earlier age where those who held important and powerful positions were expected to hold themselves to higher standards, honorable standards. You know, riches and power are one thing, but they do not equal honor. Men and women are honorable when they act justly and are yet merciful, when they are generous but not wasteful, when they are dignified but not puffed up about themselves, when they are interested or even concerned with matters that some may call beneath them, and yet are not micromanagers or meddlers, when they practice self-care but are not selfish, when they are brave but not reckless, patient but not stubborn, when they are discreet but do not sweep wrongdoing under the carpet. When they care for their friends and family, but are not nepotistic nor corrupt. When they uphold the rights of the weak and the oppressed, and when they punish evildoers. I think it's clear that there is only one reason a man or woman should be honored, because their character and stand are honorable. And everyone can choose to be honorable, even if most of the time it feels like no one recognizes your stand. Honor is when you choose what's hard because it's right. Honor is when you do what's in the best interests of others, even if it's not in the best interests of you. Honor is when you stand up to the crowd, to your coworkers, to your schoolmates, to your family, despite the consequences, and say, "No, guys, not like this, not today, not me. We can do better, we will do better." Because this is the mighty legacy of our common DY clan. These legacies of honor and love and service are my dream for our nation and its future. This vision has shaped the work I do and the stands I'm taking. In our remaining time together, I would like to speak about this work. I will not talk tonight about how, over 10 long years, I faithfully built an airstrip with the Penali people, finishing the work my father began before he died, and giving that remote community access to the rest of the world through an airstrip. That's a very long story, and we won't have time to hear tonight about how we blew Pokemon missionary style and rebuilt a Lapun tractor using parts from a Honda forklift and a Lister generator and a Suzuki Jimny and a Toyota Stout. I will also not talk tonight about the seemingly endless leadership conflict in my home church, the Good News Lutheran Church, and how that has led to one of the departments of this government entering into conflict with me, even though as I stand here before you tonight, I continue to endure, with as much grace as I can muster, undeserved harassment and injustice and painful separation from my mother and family and loved ones. As many of you know, that conflict is a direct result of my quiet but constant stand for transparency and good governance. This too is a long story, which must be told at another time and place. Know tonight, as a son of mighty trees, a son of this land, I want to speak from my heart about the horrors of Sanguma accusation-based violence in Papua New Guinea, and why you, ladies and gentlemen, can no longer leave this issue to a handful of men and women who are on the front lines. If ever there was a time when we need men and women to stand with honor, it's now. Our beautiful and beloved Papua New Guinea is fast gaining a reputation as a land where misguided men torture the helpless, a land where the police are powerless or even complicit to these crimes, a land where the followers of Jesus Christ can often be part of the problem, not the solution. There are a few of us who are working to change this grim reality: NGO groups, the human rights defenders, the Sorcery National Action Plan Committee, a few church leaders, but there are far too few of us. Even though some of the nation's key leaders have made strong public statements, the nation does not yet see it as the nation's problem. Sorcery accusation violence is just another issue, a liklik something, which only a few of us care about and speak out about. All of our talk this evening, I noted no one talked about this issue until I was introduced. That's a problem. Every time we allow the young men to drag a woman from her home, from her market stall, from the trail she's innocently walking down, and strip her naked, and bind her arms and legs, and begin to torture her, we are tearing apart the fabric of the society upon which we all depend. This is not just a crime against the woman and her family, but against our culture, our society, our nation, our future. It is not lost on me that in January 2014, I was the last man to hold Kapari Lanyeta in my arms before she was laid to rest. It should not have been me. It should have been her husband, her brother, her cousin, her son, her father. She should have lived a long and happy life. She should have been the one raising her beautiful daughter, not a stranger. And yet it fell to me to lift Kapari's abandoned and broken body from the morgue fridge and then to lay her gently into a coffin. How can it be that our beautiful nation had no pasin to show this daughter of Papua New Guinea, in life or in death? How can it be that her killers today walk free, that her family abandoned her, that her only daughter was tortured last year, a little child tortured by grown men, and that in the 1,962 days that have come and gone since the 6th of February 2013, the day Kapari Lengyeta was publicly murdered on a street corner in Mount Hagen, untold numbers of men and women, and yes, children, have suffered as she suffered and died as she died. These are daily crimes against not only individual citizens of this nation, but against the nation itself. How so? Your laws are ignored. Your sons and daughters, who sometimes like to call themselves the educated elite, are complicit to these crimes. Your story as a vibrant and beautiful democracy that practices hospitality and seeks truth, this story is daily betrayed. Because these cold-blooded murderers and their many supporters are no friends of Papua New Guinea, though they have grown in this garden alongside mighty trees of the DY clan. They themselves seem to be rotten in their hearts, filled with fear and a curse of Misave. And what is worse, they are teaching the next generation that this is what men look like. Murdering, torturing. Guys, this is not what men look like. These are daily crimes against our faith. The voice of the church, the followers of Jesus Christ, should be the loudest and the strongest and the truest voice in this room, because we are the ones whose ancestors stood there under a blue and white sky and heard the voice of God saying, "This is my son, listen to him, follow him." And yet look at us, church. Church. Look at us. We're too silent. We're gutless. And even some of us believe and perpetuate the lie that somehow these accused women might somehow have taken someone's heart and put it in the pandanus tree. And if they somehow give it back, somehow the dead will live again. And so these so-called Christian men and women fold iman and stand by, or even participate in what is the opposite of love one another as I have loved you. I am the son of missionaries, going back generations. I know there's darkness, but I also know that the light shines in the darkness. This is the time that the light, this love, God's love, must kindle and shine deeper into the darkness. This is the time that you and I must look to the honorable trees of the DY clan and learn from them and be like them. This is the time to take our stand, to bravely and generously open our branches and share our fruit with those who have been accused, those who live in fearful exile throughout this land. It is time to educate our children that these false beliefs are not Papua New Guinea's beliefs. Not anywhere, not anymore. These accusations and violence are forever unacceptable, an evil of our past and in our future, never again. I am convinced that the time is fast approaching when we will no longer justify torture and murder, making excuses for it by shrugging our shoulders and saying, well, Sanguma's real, and we know because Papua New Guineans are more spiritual than you whiteskins. Also toko semlomia. Gyaman. Dipla gyaman. Or as one young man in Enga said so eloquently to me, we in Papua New Guinea, we know what is what. Well, come to think of it, though I'm certain that particular man's head was full of nonsense, we do know what is what. We know these accusations against innocent and defenseless women are wrong. We know that Kapari Lanyeta did not eat anyone's heart. We know that Kapari, and so many like her, do not deserve to be tortured to death, driven into exile. And we know that our beautiful nation will not progress at all, so long as we sweep these horrific public crimes against our fellow human beings under the carpets of compensation and, well, embiliblongol and something blongol. Because we know what is what, as a nation, we will rise up and choose to be a better nation, one which does not condone this behavior, one which holds our police and our politicians, our civil society, and indeed every one of our citizens to a higher standard, a standard of truth and justice, a standard of honor. With you, I look forward to the day these absurd accusations and the violence associated with these false beliefs is a thing of the distant past. My dream is that I will someday meet the grandsons and granddaughters of Kapari Lanyeta, living safely and happily and fearlessly and proudly and honorably in their own nation. And I will tell them the story about how their grandmother died and how their mother survived, and how, in one lifetime, Sanguma accusations and violence became a thing of the past, thanks to the brave and honorable people of Papua New Guinea who chose and acted to make it so. I began this evening by saying that my story is part of a great story, a story with many characters and adventures and sorrows, a story in which virtues and values are set against selfishness and corruption, a story about perseverance and the hope for peace, a story about how, in each generation, we get to choose what we will do next. We have the opportunity to take stock of all that has come before us and boldly and honorably choose what we will carry forward into the new day of a bright future. I hope it has been perfectly obvious from the beginning of my remarks that this is not just my DY story, but your story too. It's our common DY story, Story Blomipla. And it's my honor and privilege to be a part of it. Thank you, long Haram Blomipla. And thank you, long walk, Yupla by making. Long come up in more display senis inside long country. Gori can kiss him over a big name. Good night.